One of the more fascinating things that's coming out of the realm of podcasting is these kind of discussions, these long-form live discussions in front of enormous groups of people where you go over very complex issues. It's a new thing. I mean, and it's something that's greatly received by the public, which is really interesting. I mean, you guys are selling out all over the place.
Yeah, well, I've really been trying to make sense of this, because I'm thinking, well, what the hell's going on? Why am I selling out 3,000 person auditoriums? And then, but not just me, obviously. Sam is doing it, and you're doing something on a larger scale, but very similar with your long form podcasts. And then there's this whole rise of what Barry Weiss described as the intellectual dark web. That's actually Eric Weinstein's coinage. And so there's a group of us that have been sort of clumped together for reasons that aren't obvious. But I've been trying to figure that out as I do these lectures. Another thing I'm doing with the lectures or the discussions is trying to continually further the development of my ideas. I use the stage, let's say, as a opportunity in real time to think. And I've been thinking, well, if you're surfing, you don't confuse yourself with the wave, right? That's a real mistake. You might be on top of the wave, but you're not the wave. And I think this long-form discussion and the public hunger for that is best conceptualized like that. There's a technological revolution. It's a deep one. The technological revolution is online video and audio, immediately accessible to everyone all over the world. And so what that's done is it's turned the spoken word into a tool that has the same reach as the printed word. So it's a Gutenberg revolution in the domain of video and audio. And it might be even deeper than the original Gutenberg revolution because it isn't obvious how many people can read, but lots of people can listen. And now it turns out, so, I mean, you got a little bit of that with TV, right? And you got a little bit of it with radio. But there was bandwidth limitations that were really stringent, especially in TV, where you could get 30 seconds if you were lucky and 6 minutes if you were stellar to elucidate a complicated argument. So you can't do that. Everything gets compressed to a kind of oversimplified entertainment. But now, all of a sudden, we have this forum for long-form discussion, real long-form discussion, and it turns out that everyone is way smarter than we thought, right? We can have these discussions publicly, and there's a great hunger for it. And I see this paralleled, so, and this would be, what would you call it, supporting evidence for this hypothesis. The same things happened in the entertainment world because, you know, TV made us think, well, we can handle a 20-minute sitcom, or maybe we can handle an hour and a half made-for-TV movie. But then Netflix came along, and HBO as well, with the bandwidth restrictions gone, and all of a sudden it turned out that, no, we can handle 40-hour complex, multi-layered narratives where the characters shift, where the complexity starts to reach the same complexity as great literature, and there's a massive market for it. And so it turns out that we're smarter than our technology revealed to us. And I think those of us who've been placed in this intellectual dark web group, you know, there's some things we have in common. We more or less have independent voices because we're not beholden to any corporate masters except peripherally. And we've been operating in this long-form space, and the technology has facilitated that. And so all of a sudden it turns out that there's more to people than we thought. And thank God for that.
There's a lot of people that are beholden to mainstream organizations, whether it's newspapers or magazines or television shows, that feel trapped. I think they feel trapped by this format that they're stuck in. It's a very limiting format. And it's a format that, in my opinion, is like, I mean, it might as well be smoke signals or ham radio or something. It's dumb. You know, this idea that you're going to go to commercials every 15 minutes and, you know, and in between you have 15 people arguing. I mean, I watched a panel on CNN once, and I think we counted 10 people that were trying to talk during this 5-minute segment. I'm like, what genius thought that it would be a good idea to get 10 people struggling for airtime, barking over each other, no one saying anything that makes any sense because everybody's talking over and trying to stand out and trying to say the most outrageous things?
There's a couple of things going on. I think one of them is the technological transformation that I laid out, and then the other is that I do believe that, especially for the radical leftist types, the whole notion of free speech among individuals is not only anathema, but also something that isn't possible within their framework of reference. I've been trying to think this through very carefully because you know, free speech in some sense has become identified as a right-wing issue. And I thought, well, how the hell did that happen? And then I thought, oh, yes, well, if you're radically left and you're playing the identity politics game, there's actually no such thing as free speech because you're only the mouthpiece of your group, whether you know it or not. So you don't get to talk as Joe Rogan. You get to talk as like Joe Rogan, patriarchal white guy. And that's it. And your utterances aren't a reflection of your own opinions as an individual, but they're an attempt on your part, whether you know it or not, to justify your position in the power hierarchy. And so everything right now, and this is where the technology and the death of the mainstream media and this political polarization all unite. Everything is turned into a political conversation in the mainstream media, and it has to be cast as left versus right. And if you're criticizing the left, then all of a sudden you're right wing, and it has to be about politics. It's like, well, it doesn't have to be about politics. It could be about philosophy. It doesn't have to be cast in political terms, and then it's also subject to a form of well, it's made more stupid than it has to be by these terrible bandwidth limitations. Like, I mean, I've been on mainstream TV talk shows, and it's a very strange experience because you're definitely content. You know, Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message, right? The medium shapes the dialogue, and it does in a tremendous way, powerful way. You go on a TV talk show, and maybe it's an hour long, something like that, and there's 5 guests, and you've got your 8 minutes, something like that, and you have to be bright and chipper and entertaining and intelligent and sort of glitzy, and it puts that facade of momentary charisma on you, and if you don't play that out, you actually fail, right? Because you can't start a long-form discussion when you've got 6 minutes, and if you're trying to talk about something that's deep and difficult, well, you want to talk about it because you've got the access then and the opportunity, but you've got your 6 minutes. You can't help but turn into sort of a glitzy entertainer. And so it cheapens everything. And then the other thing that I think is happening is that as the mainstream media, television in particular, dies, the quality people are starting to desert, like rats leaving a sinking ship. I guess they're good rats if they're quality people. But and then there's ever more enticement to use clickbait journalism to attract a diminishing portion of the remaining audience. Yeah. You know, it's like one of the things that's happened. So if you look at the 5 major indices of violent crime in the United States, they've declined by 50% in 25 years. It's absolutely beyond comprehension. It's so good. This includes violent gun crime, by the way. And yet the reports of violence in media have gone up and up and up and up. You think, well, what's going on? It's like, well, it's clickbait. It's the equivalent of clickbait. And then to turn everything into a polarized political discussion takes no real intellectual energy. But it's also driven by the death spiral of the classic media, I think. And I think that's actually why the polarization seems to be so acute now. Some of it is genuine, but some of it is the consequence of this underlying technological transformation and the death throes of the smoke signalers, fundamentally. One of the things I talk about is, well, why do you think? Why bother thinking? It's like, you think, well, that's obvious. It's like, no, actually, it's not so obvious. It's like the issue that I discuss with my students at university a lot is, well, why write a good essay? Why bother? Well, to get the grade. It's like, no, that's not why. And if you think that, well, that's better than not thinking that there's any reason for writing, but it's a bad reason. Why write? Well, writing is a form of thinking. It's actually the most demanding form of thinking, I would say. There's other forms that are demanding. So how do you write a good essay? Pick a topic that matters to you. Because if you're not writing about something that matters to you, it's like you're not living something that's meaningful. It's wrong. You're not going to write a good essay because you're wrong right to begin with. It has to matter to you. Well, why does it matter? What does it mean that it matters? Well, it means that it's going to affect how you make decisions in your life. Something that matters affects how you make decisions in your life. Well, why does it matter how you make decisions in your life? Because if you make so stupid decisions, you're going to increase the sum total of suffering a lot. You're going to do stupid things to yourself. You're going to do stupid things to other people. And you're not going to be as good a person as you could be. So not only will you do stupid and terrible things, but you won't have manifested the good in the world that you could have manifested. So that's the lack. So you write an essay so that you can think, and you think so that you can live properly. And so you write damn carefully. You make sure that every single bloody word is a word that you want to use, and you make sure the phrases that you put the words in are as solid as they can be, and you make sure the sentences are well constructed, and that they're organized into proper paragraphs, and the paragraphs are sequenced, and the content of the thing matters, and you put your soul into it. And you know when you've done that because it's gripping when you write. It's meaningfully engaging. And this is another thing that I've been sharing with my audiences. Meaning is actually an instinct. Like you think, okay, so we already decided that incremental self-improvement is the proper route. Okay, so how do you know when you're incrementally self-improving properly? And the answer is it's deeply engaging. It's deeply meaningful. And the reason for that is you're actually adapted neurologically to identify the pathway of maximal incremental improvement. That was a discovery conceptually by a guy named Vygotsky, who was a Russian neuropsychologist who coined the term zone of proximal development. You hear now and then people say they're in the zone. That's the zone of proximal development. And that's that place that you occupy when you're improving at the rate that's optimal to you. And your sense of intrinsic meaning signifies that. That's how your bloody brain is wired. And so then you might say, well, what's the antidote to the tragedy and malevolence of life? And the answer is to put yourself in the zone of proximal development, because that's where the maximal meaning is. And that actually does prepare you for life. And so the question, why think, is, well, you think before you act, and you act to put yourself in the zone of proximal development, and you do that as an antidote to the catastrophe of life. Well, that's the answer. And the thing that's cool about that, and then this is, I think, part of what I've been telling people that's sort of novel is, well, where's the meaning? The meaning is in responsibility. You know, because people avoid that's Peter Pan again, avoid responsibility. It's just a burden. It's like, no, it's not. It is a burden, but voluntarily hoisted. It's the place of maximal meaning. And the more responsibility you take, the more meaning you have. And that's the antidote to the catastrophe of life. And everybody also knows this, because just look, it's so simple. When are you sick of yourself? Well, that's when you're being useless and irresponsible for yourself and for your family and for your community. You're not even taking care of yourself. Well, you can't sleep with a clean conscience unless you're psychopathic, if you're not taking care of yourself. And then when are you not awake in the morning at 3 in the morning, tearing yourself apart with a guilty conscience? It's when you've done something useful, at least for you. You know, and you can say, oh, well, check one on my side. You say, okay, so fine, you adopt a little responsibility for yourself and you can sleep with a clean conscience. What happens if you adopted full responsibility for yourself? And then for your family. Lots of the people who are coming to talk to me say now, I've been really trying to put my family together. Like, I've made that a goal. I'm trying to heal my family and bring it together, and it's working.
It just feels like there's some crazy movement going on, that something's changing in the world because of this. This new avenue of learning and developing is opening up for these people.
Well, and I've been thinking about that too, because, you know, like I said at the beginning, if you're surfing, you don't want to take responsibility for the wave. And so, you know, I mean, first of all, a lot of what I've been telling people are things that I've gleaned from the clinical and the psychological literature. It's not like I'm coming up with this of my own accord, right? I'm transmitting information that I've learned from very, very wise people. And so there's that. But also, we don't want to underestimate the utility of the technology, right? Because we have this long-form technology now, and it's enabling us to have this discussion. And so we can get deeper into things publicly and socially than we were able to before. And I see this as a manifestation of that. And I'm hoping too that maybe what's happening, because we're going to have a lot of adaptation to do in the next 20 years as things change so rapidly we can hardly comprehend it. And hopefully the way we're going to be able to manage that is to think. And hopefully these long-form discussions will provide the public forum for us to actually think, to actually engage at a deep enough level so we'll be able to master the transformations. And I think that's possible. I mean, part of the reason that I wrote this book, and well, part of the reason that I've been doing what I've been doing for the last 30 years is because I really have believed since 1985, something like that, that the way out of political polarization, the way out of the excesses of the right and the left is through the individual. I think the West got that right. The fundamental unit of measurement is the individual. And the fundamental task of the individual is to engage in this process of humble self-improvement. I believe that's the case, and that's where the meaning is, and that's where the responsibility is. And I think, and I'm hoping that if enough people in the West, and then the rest of the world for that matter, but we're very polarized in the West right now, if enough people take responsibility for getting their individual lives together, then we'll get wise enough so we won't let this process of political polarization put us back to the same places that we went so many times in the 20th century. I don't see another antidote for it. It's not political. It's ethical.
This is a complex discussion that you're not going to get in a 5-minute segment on a talk show.
Right, exactly.
You're not going to get this on a radio show. You're not going to get this in an article that gets edited by someone with a biased opinion.
Yeah.
And this is the problem with mainstream media, and this is the problem with ideas, period. Do you worry about being overexposed?
Oh, definitely. I've been worried about that for a long time.
Yeah, and is there any benefit in that? Is there any benefit in more exposure? Are we talking about the same thing we were talking about earlier with regards to men working insane hours? I mean, is your message out enough that you don't have to do these ridiculous interviews constantly? Maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to turn into a parody of myself and all of that. I mean, I think, and I am trying to handle this, and I've got people who are advising me. We're trying to figure it out. I think that this tour is a good thing.
Yes.
But that's very controlled. I think that
it's also completely unedited.
Yes, exactly. It is.
And long-form conversations.
Yes, and I think that coming on your podcast and talking to Ruben on his shows and so forth, I think that's good. The interaction with the journalists, I'm certainly not taking anywhere near the number of opportunities that I have in front of me. Right? We are trying to be very careful in picking and choosing, but that doesn't always go well. And it could be that I shouldn't do anything that is edited at all. That's certainly possible. So,
well, this is the problem. You speak in these long form podcasts and interviews, and you get a chance to extrapolate and unpack some pretty complicated issues and compare them to other complicated issues and try to find meaning and middle ground and try to illuminate certain positions. When you expose yourself to editing, you expose yourself to someone's idea of what the narrative should be and how to frame your positions in dishonest way. I mean, and you're seeing it time and time again. Well, and it exposes the problem with media.
Look, I went to the Aspen Ideas Festival last week, which is a whole story in and of itself. But I was interviewed there by a journalist from the Atlantic Monthly. And it was a relatively long-form interview. I think we talked for 40 minutes, something like that. And it's going to be edited. Now, I trusted her. I trust her. Now, whether that'll be how that will play out in the final edit, I don't know, because she won't be the only one making the decision.
Right.
Well, the question is, should have I done it? Well, look, it was the Aspen Ideas Festival. It's a different audience. It's left-leaning. I thought, well, maybe I'll go talk to a left-leaning audience. People are always criticizing me for not doing that. I usually don't do it because I don't get invited. But so I went and talked to them. It's like, and Barry Weiss interviewed me in front of the Aspen Ideas Festival, and that was long-form, uncut, and put on the web. And so maybe that was useful. The Atlantic thing, well, it might be good. We'll see. It does expose me to the risk, though, because it'll be edited. So, and was it wise to do it? Look, I've been fortunate so far. Despite the fact that I've been taken out of context at times, and a fairly significant proportion of times, but not the overwhelming majority of times, the net consequence of all of that has been to engage more and more people in a complex dialogue, as far as I can tell. So
that's the good.
That's the good. It doesn't mean that the strategy that I've implemented so far is the only strategy that will work into the future.
We can also clearly establish that you didn't plan any of this to happen. This whole thing that happened from you opposing that bill and then going to where you are. How many years later now? 2 years?
2 years almost.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the transformation of your life and your public image. I mean, it's unprecedented. I can't think of a single public intellectual that has gone from being a university professor to being essentially a household name. I mean, you get brought up with at least my circle of friends all the time, and people that I run into all the time. I can't tell you how many people I've run into after comedy shows or in an airport that talk to me about you. So this is a mainstream thing. And
yeah, well, so that conceivably...
There's no precedent.
No. Well, it's partly, that's also partly the consequence of this technology. It's like,
yes.
Like in 2013, I thought, wonder what'll happen if I put my lectures up on YouTube. It's like, beware, man. And that's what I thought when I made the Bill C-16 videos. I got up at like 2 in the morning. I thought, this is bloody well driving me crazy. That damn university is going to force unconscious bias retraining, which is not a validated process by any stretch of the imagination, on its employees. And I work for the university, and I'm a psychologist.
So why are they doing that? Why would they do that? They do that to silence people that are protesting? Are they doing that because they want to enforce a certain type of behavior? Why?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. I think that there's some genuine concern for the dispossessed, and then there's some hatred for the successful and some envy and some resentment. It's like everything that people do. It's complicated, you know. But the pathology is, well, that the HR types, for example, at the university think it's okay for them to retrain other people about their hypothetical views on the off chance that they might be racist, and forcing them to admit that they're racist by making them agree to participate in the training. I don't think that, but for me, that wasn't even the issue, although it was an issue. The issue is, we can't measure unconscious bias reliably and validly. I'm a psychologist and a research psychologist. I know the literature. That's a misuse of it. It's a misuse of it. And the damn university was doing it. They were hiring consultants who didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
But let me ask you this. If they are, this is a university. This is an establishment for higher learning. How can they possibly act on something when there's no clear evidence that it's real, that it works, that it's effective, and they're doing it just to make people happy, or just to make themselves happy, or just to reinforce an idea that they want to be true?
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's part of, for me, it was part of the hegemony of the radical left. It's like, no, you're not going to do that at the university I work at without me telling people that there's no warrant for that from the psychological community. So anyways, I got up at 2 in the morning and made these videos. I thought, well, let's see what happens if I make these videos. It's like, well, this is back to the technology issue. It's like, I didn't know what YouTube was when I put my videos on it.
You didn't know what YouTube was?
Well, you know what, no one knows what YouTube is. That's the thing. Well, look at what happened to you. You have 1.5 billion downloads a year. It's like, you're definitely riding a giant wave. Like, would have you predicted this 15 years ago?
No.
So you know, you're in the right place in the right time, and you're a very interesting interviewer because, well, especially for long form, because you're very, very curious, but also very, very tough. Like, it's interesting watching you because if you don't understand something, you will go after the person. And you're not doing it in a vindictive way, but you're quite a formidable interviewer. And I've been trying to figure out why you're so successful. And like, you're a lot smarter than anyone might think, which is quite interesting. So you're a weird combination because, you know, your persona doesn't shout intellectual, but you're damn smart and you're tough as a bloody boot and you ask really provocative questions, and not because you're provocative. And so your personality and this long form seem to suit each other really well. You're also really good at pursuing things you don't understand instead of assuming that you know what you're talking about. So you take the listeners on a journey, right? It's an exploratory journey. But fundamentally, what's propelled you to superstardom in some sense is not just your ability, which is non-trivial, but the fact that you're on this giant technological wave and you're one of the first adopters. And I'm in the same situation. We're first adopters of a technology that's as revolutionary as the Gutenberg printing press. And so that's all unfolding in real time. It's like, look at what's happening. Yeah, well, the spoken word is now as powerful as the written word. That's never happened before in human history. And we're on the cutting edge of that, for better or worse.
That's a very good way to put it. The spoken word is just powerful. Yeah, and maybe even more so because it's so accessible to people that don't have the time to read.
Well, or
stuck in traffic, you know.
And here's another possibility. Maybe 10 times as many people can listen to complex information as can read complex information.
In terms of their ability to
process it. Yeah. Sure, could easily. We don't know. Maybe it's the same number.
It's certainly easier to listen to a book on tape for me than it is to read a book.
Yeah. Well, so the question is, for how many people is that true? And I would say it might be true for the majority of people. And then people are doing hybrids, you know. So because you can sync your book with Audible. Right? So they'll read when they have the time, but then when they have found time, which is also a major component of this, that's the time when you're driving or the time when you're doing dishes, is now all of a sudden you can educate yourself during that found time. This is a big revolution. And blowing out the bandwidth makes a huge difference because, well, we talked about that at the beginning. Looks like people are more intelligent than we thought. Everybody has an independent platform, virtually everybody. They have an idiosyncratic viewpoint. They're interested in having discussions and pursuing the furtherance of their knowledge, even though they might have a priori ideological commitments. Sam does, and I suppose I do, and Ben Shapiro certainly does. But they're still interested in having the discussion. But more importantly, they're capitalizing on the long form. And the fact that that's possible is a reflection of this technological transformation. And the technological transformation might be utterly profound. It looks like it. And so that's, you know, I've been trying to sort this out because I keep thinking, well, why the hell are these people coming to listen to what I'm saying? It's like, well, I'm a guru, you know, I'm a sage. It's something like that. It's like, don't be thinking that first. Think if there's situational determinants first. Take your damn personality out of it. Okay, what's going on? Oh yes, this is all fostered by YouTube and fostered by podcasts. What's so new about that? No bandwidth restrictions, no barrier to entrance, possibility of dialogue because people cut up the YouTube videos into chunks and make their own comments on it. It's a whole new communication technology.
Also a lack of interference by executives and producers and all these different people that have their own bias.
That's right. It's unmediated.
Yes,
right?
unmediated is giant.
Yeah. Well, and that's all part of the reason you're so popular too, is like you just put this on. Like, so you've got exactly the right balance of competent production, because there's nothing excess about it. Like, it's competent, but no more than that. I know that's by design, but you also don't edit it. It's like what you see is what you get. It's like everyone's relieved by that. We can make our own damn decisions.
Well, I think that's very important. If you're going to have a conversation with someone that's honest, you can't decide what to leave in and what to take out. Mm-hmm. It's just...
Well, that's partly also why I deal with the press the way I do. It's
yes.
like if I'm going to have a full conversation, it's like I'm willing to take the hits.
Yeah.
And
I understand what you're saying, but that's one of the reasons why it frustrates me so much is that I see what they're doing. And I'm like, what you're doing is ancient. What you're doing is, this is what people did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You can't really do that anymore. You can't misrepresent people. You used to be able to, if you were in the press, you could take people, quote them out of context, do whatever the fuck you wanted, put an article about them, and they couldn't do a goddamn thing about it. It happened to me in it was like 99. I did I had a comedy CD that came out, and this woman wrote an article about it, and she just lied. She lied about my perspective. She lied about the bits. She misquoted the bits. She didn't just paraphrase them. She changed what the bits were to make them, you know, misogynist or hateful or whatever it was. And in doing so, there was no recourse. There was nothing that I could do about that. I'm like, wow, I'd never experienced that before. I was like, this is stunning. And then I found out this person did that a lot, and this is what she did. And there's ultimate power that comes with being the person that has the pen, being the person that has the typewriter, and you're the person who works for, you know, the Boston Globe or whatever the publication is. That is something that existed forever, you know, and that you had to be either a friend of the press, you had to play ball, you had to bend to their will, you had to do what they wanted you to do. And they could misrepresent you and choose to paint you in any way they like. And it's one of the reasons why I don't do anything anymore. I don't do any interviews anymore. I don't do anything. I don't want to do anything. I do enough, man. You want to know about me? Fucking, there's 1,000 podcasts. There's more than 1,000. There's, I think there's 1,100, and there's a bunch of other ones too.
Right.
It's just, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, that it may also be the position that I increasingly find myself in.
I think it's the right position, because then the misrepresentations don't exist anymore. So then the only problem is the dispute over the actual ideological conversations or the actual concepts.
But, you know, the thing is, you know, you made a point there that's quite interesting, is like we are in a new media landscape. So now if someone comes out as a media figure with some institutional credibility and misrepresents, it's exposed. And so then the question is, how much risk should you shoulder to expose the proclivity for media misrepresentation? And the answer to that might be some. Now, it might be moving, you know, maybe I've done enough of that. I mean, it would be easier for me in many ways if I just stopped doing it. But there's some utility in having it play out. And so, so I'm trying to only take those opportunities that appear to have more benefit than risk. And when I'm defining benefit, well, the question is then what constitutes benefit? And I guess what constitutes benefit is, well, that would further the attempts that I'm making to bring information to a vast number of people that could conceivably help them stabilize and improve their individual lives. That's worth a certain amount of risk.
Well, it certainly increases your profile. And even if, you have 60% of these people are going to get a bad perception of you, 40% of these people that never heard of you now are going to understand who you are because they do further investigation.
Yeah.
So there's some benefit in that, but the negative, I mean, I get text messages from random people that I was friends with years ago that say this Jordan Peterson is just such a lying sack of shit and he's this and that. I'm like, I don't even know who the fuck you are. And then second of all, like, why are you contacting me? You're not even saying hi. You're saying Jordan Peterson is a this.
Yeah. Well, there's an emergency at hand.
He's a scam artist. He's a fraud. And I'm like, wow. And so they'll see an interview, like the Jim Jeffries clip, which is a minute long or whatever it is, or the Vice piece or the initial Kathy Newman piece. And they just form this determined position on you and then read hit pieces on you, and then this is where they take their opinion on. This is where it's from. I feel like these are the last gasps of a dying medium. I really do. I
think too.
I don't think that people appreciate it. I think the people that are listening to this that do appreciate long form conversations, and with all warts and all the ugliness and the mistakes and the critical errors and the people that appreciate that, they have a real hate for being lied to, because it changed when you're
also
trying to,
for being treated as if they're stupid.
Yes. Yeah.
Which they aren't.
Yeah. That's both things. It's deceptive. When you edit someone and take their words out of context and change them around, you're being deceptive.
And the New York Times did that again this week. They had some philosophy professor from Hong Kong University write a piece on me, and they quoted me. It was a sentence. There's like the first phrase was in quotes, and then there was some joining words, and then the second phrase was in quotes, and there was some joining words, and then the third phrase was in quotes, and the three quotes added up to a statement that bore no resemblance whatsoever to what I was saying.
How can they do that in the New York Times?
Well,
that seems to me to be something that should be the
I don't think they can.
Of what they stand for.
I don't think they can, Joe. I think they're killing their brand so fast that they can't.
But it's so disturbing to me as a person who's been a fan of the New York Times forever.
I know.
I just don't understand how they could allow that to happen. How could you allow your what is the gold standard for journalism? How could you allow it to become something that willfully misrepresents someone?
Well, they never did
push an ideology.
They never did put my book on the New York Times bestseller list. It's quite comical.
How's that possible?
Oh, they have rules, which they don't disclose, but one of them apparently is, well, if the book is published in Canada and distributed in the United States, then it doesn't count, even though they've had books like that on the New York Times bestseller list before. And I think, okay, well, is this bad or good? It's like, well, it's bad because to the degree that I might want to be on the New York Times bestseller list, although I haven't been losing any sleep over it.
But you're selling, I know how many books you're selling.
Yeah, it's basically been the best-selling book in the world since January. You know, it's gone up and down to some degree, but fundamentally,
but it should be the #1 New York Times best-selling book.
So they have their reasons, but I look at that and I think, oh well, you can only do that 10 times until you're done, because it's a fatal error. You have the gold standard for measurement. You're not measuring properly. You're burning up your brand. You think, well, we're the New York Times, so we can burn up our brand. It's like, no, you can't. Newsweek is gone. Time magazine is a shell of its former self. Like, the big things disappear, and they disappear when they get crooked and ideologically rigid. And so that's what's happening at the New York Times. Not with everyone there, but with plenty of them. And it'll die faster than people think.
But it's so confusing to me that it didn't used to be that.
Yeah.
And now it is. And are they just responding to this new world where you have to have clickbait journalism and, where people are struggling to find people to actually buy physical newspapers, which is it's a different thing.
It's hard to say, because it's weird because you don't have to resort to clickbait because these long-form discussions are the antithesis of clickbait, right?
Right, but are they struggling in terms of, how many people buy their newspaper?
Oh, absolutely. Every newspaper. The newspapers in Canada went cap in hand to the federal government for subsidies about 6 months ago because they're dying so fast. And so some of it is they're being supplanted by technology. That's a huge part of it. But as they are supplanted, they get more desperate. They publish more polarizing stories. That works in the short term to garner more views, but it alienates people from the brand and speeds their demise. Classic death spiral of a big organization. And that's going to clean things out like mad. I mean, I don't know where CNN is in the cable news rankings now, or cable show rankings, but it keeps falling. But it's falling in the rankings as cable itself disintegrates and dies. Why do you need cable TV?
Right.
No one needs cable TV. The only people who have cable TV are the people who haven't figured out yet that you can replace it entirely online for like 1/10 the price with much less hassle.
But the irony is people want a location they can go to find out what's going on in the world. And this is the one thing that they used to represent. And, you know, I mean, I don't think Fox News is any better. I think you just have these ideological extremes left and right. And I remember very clearly watching the election coverage before the election, like leading up to the election. I would go Fox News and then I'd go CNN. I just would go back and forth with them on my cable. And I would just be laughing. I'd be like, what is really happening in the world? Because I'm getting two different stories. I'm getting Russia and I'm getting Hillary's emails. This is, I mean, I don't know what the fuck is what. What is happening? I'm getting pussy grabbing and I'm getting, you know, Benghazi. You know, this is what I'm getting. And I don't understand, like, why. This is obviously ideological. This is not just.
Look, it might be that as the technology is supplanted, the ideological polarization increases as the thing dies.
Right. They're struggling for anyone to pay attention, and this is the way they have to do it to ensure.
So. And I think what's happening on the other side, which is the side you occupy, say, is that a new technology that's long form, that deals with many of those problems, is emerging. And it's going to emerge. It's going to be victorious.
But in the meantime,
it might already be victorious. In the meantime,
the clickbaity stuff still exists in the digital world.
Yeah.
You know, and then you're getting a lot of the articles that are written about you. People are absorbing these articles not from a physical form. They're getting it from digital. Yeah,
well, okay, so then the sense is, well, do you have fundamental trust in the judgment of your fellow man, let's say? And my answer to that is yes, because although I've been pilloried to a great degree by the radical types in the commentariat and in the classic journalists, the comments with regards to me on YouTube are 50-1 in my favor. And that's even the case when the ideologues put up videos about me that are designed to discredit me. And I've sold 1.5 million books. It's going to be published in 40 countries. And thousands of people are coming to my lectures. And so I would say the attempts to discredit me aren't working. So, and that, I think that's because that even if you go to YouTube, you can see Jordan Peterson smashes leftist journalist, you know, as a clickbait thing. Someone's taken a 2-minute clip from a video and they put it out and they're using that clickbait headline to attract attention. It's like it does attract attention, and that probably even furthers polarization. But I think that most people, enough people, that's the prayer, enough people are going for the long-form, thorough discussion so that the sensible will triumph. That's what I'm hoping for. The sensible will triumph.
No, I agree. And I think that is what's happening. Yeah, I think that's so why this 50-1 number exists. Yeah. Is that but the number one in that 50, the 50 versus, you know, the 50 people that are actually understanding what's going on and agreeing with you versus the number one that are trying to willfully misrepresent you, they still exist and they're loud. Yeah. Yeah. And they're fighting to be right. And this is one of the things that people love to do. They love to fight to be right. And instead of examining their position and wondering whether or not they are taking you out of context and misrepresenting your positions to the world willfully and doing so in order to paint a negative picture of you that does not accurately represent who you are and what you stand for.
Yes.
But by doing this, they're destroying
the guise of virtue without any of the work.
They're also destroying their own credibility.
Yes, well, that's the thing.
This is what's devastating about it. It's like they're trying to win. They're killing themselves.
Right. Well, and that's a good motif for the entire conversation. It's like you try too hard to win, you kill yourself.
How weird is this whole association to you? Because it's weird to me.
The IDW?
Yeah, the IDW. Yeah, just that. Well,
of course,
intellectual dark web.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's like I've been trying to puzzle it out. I mean, I think what it is a loose collection of early adopters of a revolutionary technology. That's what it looks like to me. And we found each other because we're all doing the same thing.
But it's also a bunch of people that are honest intellectually, honest about their and maybe don't even agree on things.
Oh yeah, well definitely don't
but
agree.
Honest about perceptions.
Well, and also I think interested in long form discussion.
Yes.
Right? And able to engage in it, because otherwise we wouldn't be having the relative success that we're having in the milieu. You know, and it got a name, and that's kind of interesting. And
That's Eric, though.
yeah, that's right. That's Eric. That's Eric.
He loves it.
Oh yeah, he certainly does.
He loves
and
all
he's
this
playing with
spy
it,
versus spy stuff.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah,
And he
yeah.
denies that he
Yeah,
loves it, which
yeah.
is what's most interesting
yeah,
about it. I love to rib him.
Yeah, well, it's got this funny conspiratorial element there that's sort of true and sort of mostly dramatic. And
Well, as
yeah.
a mathematician, he's always looking for patterns
Yeah.
and codes. And,
Yeah. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, things get a name, and then you think, well, why did that get named? And well, someone named it. But the name stuck, so it seemed apropos to some degree. And well, what do we have in common? Most of us are entrepreneurial. Most of us have our own platform so we can speak independently. Most of us are interested in long-form philosophical discussions, primarily, not political, but bordering on political. Well, Ben's more political, obviously.
Yeah, he's the most.
Yeah, but he's also a very sophisticated political commentator, so he borders on both the philosophical and the religious,
Yes.
right? So, and then we're all the new adopters of this new technology, and so that's enough to put us in a group. And then, well, it turns out that we've all been talking to each other, but part of the reason for that is, well, we're all doing the same thing on the net, so it's not surprising that we're talking to each other. So I always go for the simple explanations first. You know, it's not a movement exactly. What it is, it's the manifestation of a new technology. And then, well, do we have anything in common that's worth discussing that would make this a viable group, let's say? And the answer to that is, I don't know. You know, I've been touring with Ruben. That's been good. It's been good to have a comedian along. And he's also a good interviewer. He does the Q&As with me. And it's nice to have some levity in the mix because the conversations the discussions with the audience are very serious. Although I can crack a joke. And I can't tell a joke. But if something funny occurs to me, I can say it. And
Yes.
sometimes it's funny. So
Yes.
that's something. You know, and we've been discussing a fair bit, and I've had good conversations with Shapiro and Harris for that matter. So there is lots of interplay between us, but I think that's more because we inhabit the same technological space more than the same ideological space, apart from the fact that we are actually interested in dialogue, fundamentally.